finally got your first leadership gig, loving the new role, but feeling the pressure of your new responsibilities and all that expectation to perform? Well, don't worry, you're not alone. Crossing the chasm from a technical role to leadership, from doing stuff to managing and leading people, is the toughest challenge any leader must make. Welcome to the Human Edge Show, the podcast dedicated to help you do just that, successfully cross the doing to leading chasm. Campbell Such here, Chief Chasm Crossing Guide. I've made all the mistakes so you don't have to. I want to help you learn those lessons much more easily by sharing my experiences and talking with brilliant people who have already figured it out. You'll get great actionable tips, strategies, and techniques to make the transition so much easier and faster for you. Now let's get to it. Welcome to another episode of the Human Edge Show. Today, I'm super excited to have with me Stefan Preston. Stefan is an active entrepreneur and company director. In his early career as CEO, he successfully led several significant New Zealand retail and consumer companies, including Whitcoulls, Noel Leeming, Bond & Bond, and Bendon. Stefan worked with Stanford D School, IDEO, and many other leading innovators to play an active role, an active part in the development of programs to improve New Zealand company innovation capability. Stefan remains an energetic participant in NZ Inc., having recently designed and developed the Fresh Thinking Initiative at NZTE, New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. Stefan founded Meaningful Technology to focus on the application of semantic web technologies to unify enterprise data into a single knowledge store and integrate enterprise applications. Stefan is an advisory board member of the NZTE Beachheads program. He holds a BE Honours from Auckland, Bachelor of Engineering Honours from Auckland, and an MBA from Stanford. Welcome to the Human Edge Show, Stefan. It's fantastic to have you on board.
Thanks, Campbell.
Look, just to kick off, what's something that not many people would know about you?
Oh, yeah, I don't talk about this a huge amount, but I'm getting to the point in my career where I want to do things that are a little bit different. So I'm training with a mentor to be a captain of a ocean-going vessel. And I plan to be away on my own ocean-going vessel for 3 years, starting next year. And we're just doing 3-month trips at the moment from New Zealand. So, and I'm really enjoying it, and it's super challenging. And, it's the kind of adventure you can do when you're north of 55.
And what sort of vessel is it, Stefan? Is it sailing? Is it powered? What's the...
It's actually powered. It looks like a little frigate. It's 68 feet long.
Wow.
Kind of one of 18 vessels in the world that's specially designed for long, safe and comfortable passage making.
Wow, awesome. Oh, well, that sounds like exciting times coming up for you. So, and a bit more study, so learning some new things and challenging yourself.
Yeah, I always think it's good to, every sort of 10 years, you've got to completely throw everything out and change your life. Otherwise, you get to the end of your life and you wouldn't even know that it passed, would you? Because every day was the same. You wouldn't really remember it. But if you do different things all the time and challenge yourself, it seems like you live 5 to 10 lives,
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it's certainly, as you go through your life, if every day is the same, time seems to fly, and when you do new things, go on a vacation, go and take something on that you've never done before, time seems to slow down, and you get a whole lot more of a sense of accomplishment and time going on. Stefan, just stepping back into your long and successful career, can you remember your first steps into leadership and the sorts of challenges that you had at the time, how you felt, and perhaps some of the mistakes that you made at the time that you might do differently?
Yeah, I might just hold that thought and just start for a second and just tell you what I think leadership actually is. Because I think it's one of those kind of words which people say and oftentimes have a different view of what it is, right? So I think for me, the question is about this word influence, right? We in a workplace, we work in teams, and what we do is we seek to influence people to act in alignment toward an objective, right? And so I think there are principally 2 ways how you can influence people. And the first one is just compliance, right? You say, like, do that or I'm going to fire you. And look, honestly, that's just way more efficient than what I call leadership for certain things, right? Like if you wanted to get someone to wear a name badge in a store, you don't say, oh, look, let's go and, I'll try and influence you in some sort of kumbaya way. It's easier just to say, well, it's a mandatory requirement to do it. If you don't do it, I'm going to fire you after 3 warnings, right? So it's easy to get compliance if you just put the line in the sand and actually measure the behaviours and sanction them if they're not there. But that works for stuff that's super easy to measure. And, that's what I call table stakes, kind of management table stakes, Leadership's different. Leadership is a way of influencing people which seeks to get people to want the same thing as what you want from their own intrinsic motivation, right? And so the ingredients of that is that you need to be able to state clearly what success looks like and what good behaviours are. And then you need to be able to enroll people into wanting the same thing. So, part of leadership is just selecting people who just already happen to want the same stuff as what you do. But also there's a certain amount of influence and inspiration that goes with it as well. So that's how I think of leadership, right? So to answer your question, in the early part of my career, my concept of, I'm very task efficient personally. I'm lucky I got born with a smart brain and, I do things really quickly. And so task efficiency is something that people are really good at their technical side of their skill set in their early career. Task efficiency almost blinds you to your power as a leader, right? Because you're so capable, you just do it yourself. And it's almost like painful to have to deal with the fact that other people can't do it as quickly or as well or whatever. So if I had to say what my fault was early in life, it was just basically that I was an arsehole. And in the sense that I really didn't have any empathy for the experience that other people had around me, right? So I'm just a super task efficient guy. But the problem with being task efficient, it doesn't matter how task efficient you are, eventually you run out of bandwidth because it's only just you, right? So if you want to advance in your career and get paid more money and be more senior and have more interesting things to do, eventually you've got to figure out, how do I get loads of other people around me to want what I do and to be able to kind of do a version of that to give me leverage, right? And the kind of the scales dropped from my eyes when I did a course, a couple of weekends. It was a course, but the course was sort of, the first course was kind of like, let's understand the kind of person you are because of how you got born and all the kind of instinctive shit that you do to be who you are without really being conscious about it. And then the second course was about, well, now that you understand all the crappy low-rent behaviours that you have as an instinctive human, let's now think about how we consciously choose our behaviour and choose our way of being so that we can have more power as a leader, right? And that requires you to ask yourself the question of, who are you? Like, what are you trying to do in the world? And of course, that's a super open-ended question, isn't it? Like, who the hell are you? Most people can't even answer it. I'd say 95% of people can't answer that simple question. And the way you answer it is you've got to really get present to a passion that you have in your life, whether it's at work or home time or whatever. But most people get into a thing called flow. And flow is just when your life is just wickedly cool, right? And you've got to really ask yourself, like, why did I feel that way? And when you answer that question, you ask yourself, why about that and why, until you get down to it. And for me, it was a realization that actually the happiest I am is when I'm helping people. And in particular, when I'm helping people in the environment where we're building something, whether it's building a house or building a building. And, it was no accident that I was in the construction industry early in my career. I used to love that. And then building companies. And to me, building companies is probably the most challenging thing that a human could do, right? There's so many variables, very large amount of them you can't control. And so it's just incredibly dynamic, very stimulating, and you have to be challenged and be engaging as a human to do it, right? So you can train to be a leader, and I kind of got some training, but what it really made me present to is just being able to consciously choose my behaviour in a situation and be able to be present for other people and understand and be empathetic to them. But when you get that, what happens is it vastly increases your power. So if you're doing public speaking or talking in a room, whatever, because you're fundamentally centered outside yourself and you're interested in the other person's experience and you're really listening. And that's the thing about great leaders is they appear to be very engaged and listening and very caring about the other people. It's actually a very generous thing. And but of course it's super hard to be that way when you're just kind of wrapped up in your own concerns and worried about how you look, all these things, trying to make yourself look good. There's no way to look good being a leader. You can't do it that way. It's not easy.
Stefan, that's fascinating. You talked before about influence, and so compliance versus influence were kind of the two key things, if I got you right. And one of the things that you talked about,
enrollment, both of them are set to influence people, right?
Compliance and enrollment. Yeah. So early in your career, presumably there was a lot of compliance to what you did as opposed to the enrollment piece, and then over time, perhaps after some of that getting to know who you were piece that happened, some of those kind of doors opened up and you saw the value of those things. What would you advise for a new leader who's come from a task-oriented technical area of expertise where they've got this toolbox of stuff that when they try and go up the hill of leadership, that toolbox has pretty much got not too many tools in it that they need to be a really good leader? Where do you start to understand, is it the right thing for you as to be a leader as opposed to going down a technical path? And then once you've worked out that's what you do, and that if having this sense of it's about helping other people, how do you then start to build your toolbox of tools to head down that path?
I think the first thing is you've got to acknowledge that there is such a thing as leadership, like it's just as there is such a thing as your technical competence, right? But let's say you're a really good hardware engineer and you got screwdrivers and tools and knowledge of networking and all these good things, right? And it seems very tangible to you, right? And so what you will do if you don't acknowledge that there is a set of, like a legitimate skill set, that's kind of a people-oriented skill set about influencing people through leadership. If you don't acknowledge that, then what happens is you go back to your comfort state, right? So your comfort state is being really technically competent. So what you're going to do is, like, to a hammer, the whole world looks like a nail, right? So if you're a technically competent one, what's going to happen is you're going to, dominate other people by just being a smarter technician. And some people will respond to that, right? There'll be a small percentage of people who work for you, particularly the competent ones. They'll just like that because they'll feel like they're in a club. And that's cool. It's kind of accidental leadership, right? But it'll unravel in most circumstances. It won't be very effective, right? The first thing is just acknowledge it. And then the question is, like, how can I rapidly increase my skill set? And one of the first things I could say is find a leader that you admire and you believe has really advanced skill sets and get them to mentor you. So being curious and reaching out to other people who know what you don't know is a really, really good way of learning, right? For me, probably the most transformative experience I had, I mentioned I did this course before. It was like only 2 weekends of my life. And even to this day, it's transformed my thinking and power in the world. And you can just go and do the course in just about any city in the world. And it's called Landmark. And literally, this is the thing about it. People think it's like a cult. It's so transforming for some people, and other people it's like, they freak out. It's a cult. There's nothing like that at all. It's just literally a course for 2 weekends. But they'll make you do some super uncomfortable things to grow. And this other thing I want to say about leadership is fundamentally great leadership is about emotional growth. And, like they'll make you ring up like people in your life that you've had lifelong feuds with and, family members you haven't said sorry for X and Y and all this kind of thing. It's all exercises about generating a muscle and getting away from the kind of instinctive behaviours that make you lose power as a leader and giving you some tool sets and powers as a personal leader. So I tell you what, when you go through that kind of growth, it gives you an entirely different lens on the world. I'll just relate an exercise they got me to do which really transformed me.
This is at Landmark, Stefan.
They made me go out in the street on a rainy day in the middle of the city and ask 10 people 10 requests that I'm certain they'll say no to. Now, for me, that was like mega uncomfortable, right? I hate being rejected. But I went out there and 9 out of 10 people said yes, and it just blew me away.
Wow.
And this is the thing, if you want to lead, part of the idea of leading is you get there first, right? You create the trend, you create the goal, set the goal, and you commit to it, and you do whatever it takes to get there. And oftentimes what it takes to get there is you need to ask people things that are unreasonable. And, I once worked with a pretty great entrepreneur and I couldn't believe the sort of shit he's getting people to do for him. But the thing is, he just said, I just ask and they do it. And he was just had a really strong muscle in that area. And, the thing is the best learning you can do is learn by doing. Right? So not looking at a whiteboard, listen to a podcast or whatever. But I guarantee you, if you aren't good at asking people for what you need to succeed, then if you go and do that exercise, it will blow you away and change you forever. And that's what I like about courses like that, is that they force you to do things you wouldn't otherwise do. And that's where the true learning is, right? So learning by doing changes you emotively, it sets new boundaries you never had before. So I think there are a few golden lessons to learn. And if you can learn them efficiently like that in 2 weekends, then more power to you, right? But what you have to be is super curious and willing to lay yourself on the line to do it. And not many people are. That's the thing. Amazingly, 90% of us are essentially not curious at all, not willing to make ourselves uncomfortable or try something risky or something to learn something new. And that's why most of us aren't really good. They're just more comfortable being a sheep in a paddock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So going back to your early leadership role, was that a decision that someone else made and said, hey, Stefan, here's something you should try? Or was it something that you actively sought out and went after?
When I was 22, I was probably 25, 26, maybe something like that. I was working in construction, and I worked in New Zealand, and I went offshore, and I was a project engineer for construction, jump forms and automated construction and stuff. So kind of the heavyweight end of construction. And the project manager I worked for was like an amazing leader, like super effective, but kind of in that butt kicking way, potentially abrasive to non-performers. I think he was just like one of those people that just naturally can get shit done with a good team, But I nevertheless learned a lot of him. And then there was a big project in town that was stuffed up by another contractor, and they got us in to fix it. And he went over there to sort that out. So I ended up running this $90 million construction with 1,000 guys working on it. And we were spending $1 million a week, which is a lot in 1989 or whatever.
Yeah.
And they gave me this like much older, like 62-year-old foreman So the foreman is the guy that does the kind of real hands-on telling people what to do, and the project manager, that's me, is sort of in charge of everybody, including that and all the subcontractors. And I was green as the trees, right? But I think highly respected as well because, it's a performer. And the older foreman guy, he just gives you the benefit of those lessons learned by decades of working, And I remember one time I was getting a bit worried about progress and stuff, and I was like, what do you think? We'd probably get a bit more resource on. And he's like, no, let's take 10% out. So there was debate with him, and, we had this big side office looking into this 10-story hole, and, there was like levels of underground car park being built. And we looked out there and he said, have a look at everyone on the construction platform and count how many people are actually working right now. And sure enough, about 30% of the people there were just yakking to each other. Like, let's take 10 out, that'll just break the tension and get everyone focused, right? And sure enough, we took 10 out, we increased our performance by 20%. So, I think the thing is you don't always do your learning from, you'll naturally try and get a mentor who's somebody you want to be in the future kind of thing. But if you're really good at learning and growing and being curious, you can listen to everyone. And I'm listening to this guy who's working for me, and everyone's view of the world is different than your view. Even when you're CEO of a company, the person that works in the janitorial services, they're going to see a piece of your company you can never see.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you do have to be effective as a leader. You better drill down to micro detail. And you also have to, keep an eye on the strategy and the overall structure of things. But I often find the transformation is selective digging to that tiny detail. And it often comes from people you'd never think of to talk to, because they see things you don't see. And,
So when you were CEO of Bendon Whitcoulls, what did you do to give yourself the best chance of hearing and seeing that stuff that was at the front line or at the janitorial level or at the lower levels in seniority anyway in the organisation? Because so many senior leaders end up being isolated from all of that stuff, and people end up telling them what they want to hear rather than what they need to hear. What do you do to make sure that stuff happened for you?
Yeah. Well, one of the really cunning workarounds for that was hiring an assistant who, and I don't like executive assistants. I think they're wasteful, and I don't need them really, except for we had one who was nominally kind of there to support the senior team administratively, right? But she's incredibly gregarious and talks to everyone in the company. And I'm not that kind of person, fundamentally, I'm not that interested in hanging out and shooting the breeze with people in my team. And I'm very task-oriented, just who I am. So I know that weakness, right? So I get someone who's super gregarious, I build a really great relationship with them. And then they build great relationships right through the thing. And then what that does is give this pressure release valve, right? So she's tapped into everything that's happening. So, for example, let's say one of the staff, their mum dies or something, it's really tough for them, but they're not really talking heavily about it. She'll know. And I'll be there sending the flowers just at the right time and just the right way with the right messaging, or somebody's birthday, and it will look like I literally know everything there is to know about that life and that person and everything else. And the thing is, like, practically in a company spread over 4 or 5 countries by the time I was finishing it with 500 people working for it, practically I can't possibly be connected to that sort of thing. But by figuring out a positive way to build connection to people really efficiently like that, I was able to be that person, that almost has a personal connection with everyone in the organisation. And it's not like the fact that I don't want to spend all my time doing that or can't or not even that good at it doesn't mean I don't care, but I've got to enable myself to be able to be at the right place in my time in a very efficient way, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of my cheat sheet on that. But my overall I guess, recommendation is that you need to work out a way to be the kind of person that knows everybody's name. You know, like I'm absolutely crap at it. You got to work really hard at it. Try to do some memory games or whatever, but I can tell you the power of knowing people's names, knowing what they do, and valuing them at a personal level. Man, that's going to get you 50% of the way just right there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's awesomely powerful. The guy that was my boss's boss at Bidfood, he had that awesome power, and he wouldn't just remember my name; he'd remember my wife's name, and he'd remember the last 3 conversations he had. And normally, you know, Andy had a great sense of humor as well, so he could take the piss. So it was incredibly powerful, and it brought people together. So, you know, I fully understand that. And the other piece that you talked about recognizing I'm a big believer in working out what your strengths are, which are things that you love to do and that you're good at.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's the other way around, that you're good at and love to do, because some things you're really good at, but you actually hate doing them. So why would you want to do them, right? And if you work out what your real strengths are or your weaknesses, and then you do more of that stuff and find other people who have got the strengths to do the things that aren't your strengths, like your, for want of a better term, executive assistant, that's a really powerful thing to recognize as a leader, right? Is to be able to build a team that fills in the gaps that you know you're weak in.
Yeah, I mean, that thing is called self-awareness, right?
Yeah.
The reason it's difficult for people to have self-awareness is because they don't want to confront what they're weak at. Because somehow a lot of people, to feel good and confident in the world, they need to believe in the story of themselves as a sort of superpower, you know, they can win. And the reality is it's just impossible. The more you grow as a leader and the more span of control you have and the more complexity that's in, you know, this idea of control and dominance, it's like impossible.
Yeah. And
so you've got to get your confidence intrinsically, not extrinsically. A lot of people get their confidence extrinsically, like by through recognition or people saying they're really good or whatever, having a badge or a title or whatever. The only way you can really have confidence intrinsically is to be super humble about yourself and not find it uncomfortable that you don't know everything. Like, it's actually a relief, people in the room, when you say, look, you know, I have a view, but it might not be the right view simply because I can't have all the knowledge. And so that means, hey, here's someone who can listen to me, and I'm going to be encouraged to tell them the realities because they're actually truly interested in learning and growing, you know. Plus, when you see that your leader isn't perfect, doesn't know everything, it's also more empowering for you because you feel like you can contribute more, and if you can contribute more, you get more knowledge.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, you know, that's absolutely right. Stefan, in your senior leadership roles, what is there anything that you've seen around? Well, one of the biggest challenges that we have in leadership is making that first step out of a technical role, whatever that looks like, into a leadership role. And there's a big chasm to cross. And there's, you know, all the learnings that we talked about before that you have to go through, and self-awareness, and then start to build empathy and all of that stuff. But someone's put them in that role, which is their boss, if you like. And what happens with a lot of leadership positions that get filled either from internal appointments or brought in externally, they end up being thrown in the deep end, and it's sink or swim. What have you seen in your life, in your leadership life, and in your life that's really made it, that's been really powerful from the point of view of the leader's leader who's put them in that role to really help them succeed and give them the best chance at minimizing the failure and then being able to accelerate up that hill of leadership and success?
Yeah. I feel like I can contribute to that conversation quite powerfully because one of my real core interests these days, and been for the last 15 years, is how do you grow organisations very efficiently and effectively from New Zealand to international market, right? And I've been a kind of a pioneering advisor inside NZTE on it, and been working with like 1,000+ companies in terms of creating programs that have impact on that. And one of the greatest issues we've got is leadership, obviously, because if we have great entrepreneurial leaders, then we can grow companies and solve all the problems and everything else. So having a deficit of leadership is actually a really big issue for us. And we started this program called Fresh Thinking, which is like a 2 or 3 hour session that the subject of which is the explicit design of the organisation, and the target is obviously the CEOs and directors of the company. And I've done 250 of these things and as a prototype and constantly iterated them and learned a lot about it, right? And the first thing, this idea of mentorship, you can have an extraordinary transformational impact on people as a mentor, okay? But I want to start with the first and greatest mistake that's made by mentors is this thing called advice. And I have this thing where I never advise anybody what to do or say you should do this or whatever. One, there's no possibility in any way, shape or form that you can possibly understand in a short time the context that a person faces in their leadership role. And when people give advice, they normally give advice from their own frame of reference, which isn't the same. And the other thing is that a lot of advice that's received, there'll be a whole lot of barriers to it. Like, for example, people have, it'll be emotionally uncomfortable for someone to go to that place, so they'll have to say, oh, that advice must be bullshit because, whatever, I feel badly about it, whatever. The other thing is the person who's receiving advice most likely is getting 10 different conflicting loads of advice from 10 different contexts and 10 different unrelated people, right? So what you've got to understand is that the mentee is responsible for the design of their own leadership, okay? And it's an intensely personal thing for them. And it's going to be a function of where they are at and what comfortable and emotional, being they are. And it's going to be a function of the particular situation they're in and their strengths and weaknesses and their people and other resources around, all sorts of things which you can't possibly hope to know, right? So the way that we manage these mentoring sessions is that behind the session is a kind of framework which is what I call an axiomatic framework. So just all that means, fancy word, it just means that it's a framework nobody can argue with. It's like completely obvious to anybody that it's true, right? And so what I need to do in those sessions, I need to be able to be a super amazing listener. And when you're a super amazing listener, what you're doing is you're not interpreting what you're hearing. You're just trying to hear it as it is. And you're also not just listening to the words, you're also listening to the body language and the different reactions between people in the room and all that. Now, you can't possibly listen to that level of complexity without something to organise your thoughts, right? And that's what I mean about this model. So I've quite a model I've refined over the last 15 years. And it's actually a model that's taken from the discipline of design. Okay, so we say, well, as a leader, what we're doing, really, we're kind of chief of design as a leader. And what we're doing is we're sort of making design decisions around our leadership all the time. And we haven't got time probably now to talk about the model, but what I'm doing when I'm listening to the situation is one thing I'm doing a lot of listening, but what I'm also doing is going, well, where does that sit, that person model, because what I want to do, it's always in my mind, is I want to be able to leave that person with a breakthrough, okay, in their leadership. Because what happens when you have a breakthrough is it's incredibly rewarding. If I can help someone have a breakthrough in their thinking, get to a new level of performance, that's a highly rewarding mentorship session, right? And the thing is, everybody's at a different part on their path, and they've all got different pressures. So what's really important for me is to listen hard enough to know where's the likely breakthrough for this person. Okay? Now, the other thing is that we're most likely going to be talking about things that are logical, and you can sort of demonstrate that here's some design choices you have, and you might have some choices that but there's these ones you don't know about. And here's a way of thinking about what design choice might be better for you. Right? You can do that. But also you've got these emotional issues, like with people trying to deal with leadership problems that are beyond their emotional capacity to deal with, right? Like they're actually fearful of the outcome. And in that situation, it doesn't matter how much logic you deliver, it's the emotional fear that is in play, right? So what I'm looking to do is go, well, look, where's the access point for breakthrough? And if there's an emotional fear issue and everything in there, then the focus has to be on that. Because if someone's emotionally fearful, there's no amount of coaching on design choices about where you are in your situation that's going to help. So I use a number of techniques in the sessions, which I think are really, really important. One thing is I never judge people. Like I always want to talk to them like it's a peer-to-peer. In other words, I'm not saying I'm an expert, so look at me, how good I am, this is what I'm doing, this is what you should do. I'm saying, clearly I bring something to the table that's different to you, but what you've got at the table is different to me. I don't possibly know what your situation and context is. But when we get together, we're going to find some cool things together that are new and different, It could be a breakthrough, right? And so no judgment. I'll spend a lot of time up front making it safe for that person, right? Even to look bad, there's going to be no judgment. I use humour. Well, it depends on the person, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of assume that everybody has quite a high level of emotional attachment to what they do and their own competence and their own feelings as a leader or a good technical person, whatever. So what I find is it's not the advice that helps, it's asking the right questions. Mm. And you'd be amazed the power of a well-targeted question. Right? And what I'm looking to do is I'm trying to get the person to discover the solution for themselves. Yeah. But what I'm really doing is just asking the right question.
Yeah.
I might tell some anecdotes that are relevant. A long career doing shitty things, So I've got some good anecdotes that'll help. And what that does is it allows them to look at situations that are analogous to the situations they're in, but in a detached way. Like, okay, that gets me away from my emotional fear, and I can see this analogous situation, what happened, and I can see that the guy I'm talking to is still alive and perfectly comfortable about talking about it. So it's not that bad. It's perfectly normal, and I've got to just harden up and get used to taking shit like this, and I feel okay now.
Yep.
I've normalised.
And you haven't given him any advice either, or her any advice. So there's nothing to resist. It's just here's the situation. Consider it, and it might help.
Now, with some people, you need extraordinary skill to pull it off.
Yeah.
Now, I remember this one guy who was really comprehensively failing in leadership of his organisation, but he come in, he's like 75 years old, owns this like $3 million company. He comes in dressed with a suit and he's super tall, good looking, got a bloody hanky in his pocket and all this, And then I get him to introduce himself, and it's like you can't shut him up. It's like half an hour of saying how amazing he is. He's the doyen of the design industry of New Zealand, and all this stuff. And I could see that his company was in a lot of trouble because they were just doing some really obvious shit wrong. But it's like having in that situation, which is a very extreme situation, mentoring. The strategy that I use there is it's like if a big guy comes and fights you and you're a little guy, when he comes charging in, you've got to use his own weight against him. And so what you do is you grab on and pull him down even harder. His own momentum takes him down, you just duck out of the way. It's a bit like that with this, right? I was like, well, what's your strategy? And he talked to me about a strategy. Actually, the guy knew his shit, right? It's totally amazing strategy. And then after I'd said that is amazing, that's exactly what I would do, the slogan, and I was not bullshitting, it was exactly that. And then in the last 10 minutes, I just said, so what I don't get is here's your website, and everything you said, nothing of it is in here. This is all things to all people, like, all that good stuff and that great strategy we talked about, is nothing there. And then he went in his head, he's like, oh my God. And then his explanation was that his people had gone AWOL on him and he needed to get in and sort it all out, and he'd been too far away from it, which is probably all true, but it was also a lot that was saving his own ego, from this absolute smashing to the ground. But I'm left not judgmental. I just asked a question, right? Yeah. And he was the one who judged himself. Now, in that world, you can get the toughest customer, to see the light.
Yeah.
And so, as a mentor, is a really hard thing to do, but if you do lots of it, like I have, you find, the toolkit gets sharpened up pretty well, and so that can be really helpful. And, if you're super lucky, you'll find somebody in your life who can help you. And I am lucky in my life now, I don't have to work, which is great, and I can spend time on my boat, and I'm director of a few things, but it's not taking an enormous amount of my time and energy. And every now and then, some young person rings me up and goes, look, I'm trying to do this, will you talk to me? Unreasonable request, right? And I say, sure, and we go and have coffee, and I've got a little posse of people that I might talk to once every 3 months. And, they come to see me with their ideas, and they walk out with 10x of those ideas, and they go and give that a lash and come back half beaten up but excited, and they come back for another lash. And I'm like, wow, I just know who's going to succeed. And it's basically people are super curious and ask unreasonable requests to get mentored and get to grow, And it's super cool to see.
Yeah.
So, that is it's a sort of a way of thinking for your audience, I guess, in terms of this transition. That's a positive, energetic commitment to leadership growth expressed in going and asking for help from people that are inspiring to you. And then taking it on yourself to go and put the effort in that rewards people like me, right? There's nothing, I find it really rewarding because I like building people up. I find it really rewarding, and 3 months later they come back and go, oh my God, this is awesome. And, what do you think about this? And geez, it's no effort for me. It's all I get is reward. It doesn't really cost me anything other than get free lunch, Yeah.
Stefan, that's awesome. So just to wrap that one around the original question, which was a leader who's just put a new leader into a new role, and what advice you would give to them in terms of helping that new leader to succeed would be to make sure that they have some mentoring and coaching or whatever wrapped around them to be able to take them on that journey, which may not be you and probably isn't you.
Yeah, sharpen up your mentoring skills, right?
Yep.
If you are a leader of leaders, and you're committed to growing the quality of leadership in your group, then be a mentor, number one. But I also agree with you that, it's bring in other mentors. So, for example, the other day, there's a middle manager in NZT who got a team of 8 people, and they asked me to come and do a mentoring session with the group. And we did that, and it was super transformational for the group. I'm still hearing people buzzing about it, and it's a super good use of my time. And it was fun. I got to meet some people who, are struggling with stuff, and gave them some really cool tools. And that was just somebody taking an offsite for 3 hours and getting someone like me there to help them. And you don't have to be super structured about that, but you can, just find people that inspire you and bring them in and help contribute to your team, Yeah.
Stefan, thank you so much. That's been absolutely awesome. Some incredible gems in amongst all of that. In fact, an overwhelming number of amazing bits of information that people that are listening and watching can take away and digest. So thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. It's been awesome, and good luck on your new captain's venture. I hope that goes really well. I'd love to get you back on the show sometime to talk about your model, because I'm completely curious about what that is and how that might work. So thanks again.
I think what I'm going to do while I'm away is start writing a book about it. Because it's kind of the culmination of a whole career, looking at like how do you get people to break through in a much more powerful way. And, I think this design way of thinking about business is so, for a start, not done, and B, so powerful. And because I've done it like hundreds of times and perfected all the little wrinkles, I feel like we've got it to the level of elegant simplicity, beyond complexity is elegant simplicity. So I feel like I've kind of like polished it to that level now. So now I need to get it on paper and do a proper job with it.
Fantastic. Stefan, thank you. Look forward to maybe catching up again at some point on the show.
Okay.
Take care.
Thanks, Ken.
Okay, see you.
Thanks for listening. If you have a friend or a colleague who would benefit from this episode, please pass the word along. If you have a friend or a colleague who would not benefit, but you haven't been in touch with them for a while, give them a call. iTunes reviews are great to get the word out and to help me create the show that's most useful for you. And if you're frustrated or having challenges or would like some help, guidance, assistance with your first leadership role, then check out integrationcatalyst.com in the link in the podcast notes below. Or pass this on to your boss to nudge them to get you the help you really need to cross the doing to managing chasm and get you powered up on your leadership and management journey. Oh, and if you want to make sure you don't miss an episode, hit subscribe. Until next time.